third graders. This week in our reading and our writing, we've been talking a lot about being able to teach other people what we're learning or what we already know. Today, I want to show you that when you read nonfiction, you can teach other people the things you learned, which actually helps you become an expert on the topic also. So I'm going to go over some ways that you can be a really good teacher when you're talking to somebody else. And then I'm going to show you an example of what it looks like to teach somebody else about what you learned from your reading. After this video, your assignment is going to be to read a new nonfiction text and teach somebody, well, you're going to teach your teacher, you're going to make a recording about the text that you learned. All right, so first let's go over some ways that you can teach well.
Okay, third graders, the first way that you're going to teach well is by knowing the main idea and the supporting details of your text. We've been learning this week how to find out what the main idea is by paying attention to those pop-out sentences and the subtitles, and then finding all the details that prove that main idea. After you finish your reading today, you're going to have to know the main idea of the section you're teaching about before you can actually teach anybody else. Secondly, you should be using an explaining voice. When you use an explaining voice, you speak clearly, confidently, and you don't speak too fast or too slow. Thirdly, you should use gestures. That means you can move your body a little bit to help explain your point. It also helps keep the watcher and listener more interested in what you're saying. Finally, you can use a teaching finger to point out charts, illustrations, and diagrams from the book to help you explain. So let me show you what each of these looks like in an example. The first one, knowing your main idea and supporting details, is really important. So this is the section that I read about that I am going to teach as an example today. You've probably already heard all this information because I've been using it as an example in other lessons as well. But the section of text that I read came from this book, Gorillas, and it came from the chapter on what adaptations help the gorilla survive. So what parts of the gorilla help it survive in the jungle? After I read that section in the book, I really thought about the main idea of it and the details that proved that. And I wrote that information here. We're going to be learning later this week how to write the main idea and details on a chart like this. But for now, you can just use our hand strategy with the 5 fingers, or you can try and write it down if you'd like to. So my main idea is going to be that the gorilla's bodies are adapted for survival in the jungle. And these are my 3 details of how I know that that's true. So, as you can see, I already have step 1 down. I already know what the main idea and supporting details are going to be. Now let me teach you about that section of my learning from my book, and I want you to watch for these other 3 things that I do while I teach you.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example now of what it might look like to teach somebody about what you read about in your nonfiction text. Here we go. Hello, I just read this really cool book called Gorillas, and I wanted to teach you about one of the sections that I read. I was reading the section called What Adaptations Help Gorillas Survive? And I found out that gorillas' bodies are actually adapted to survive in the jungle. First, they have really, really long arms. Their arms can help them reach really far things, like their food up in trees, and they also help them walk on all 4s. The next thing I learned was that they have opposable thumbs and toes. That means that they can move their thumbs and toes differently than the rest of their fingers and toes. Here's a picture of their opposable toes. So that big toe right there moves differently than the rest of the foot. And their opposable toes help them by peeling their fruit, making nests for their families, and carrying their kids around. Finally, the last thing I learned is that gorillas have really big, sharp teeth, and they use those teeth to rip the skins and the peels off of their food, and they also help protect their babies because they might need to use them to fight or defend themselves. That is everything that I learned today about gorillas. I hope you think it's as interesting as I do. Okay, third graders, I want you to pause the video now and say out loud what you noticed that I did that was part of our teaching tips. Did you notice that I used an explaining voice? Did you notice that I used gestures? Did you notice that I used a teaching finger to show some charts or pictures? Pause the video and say out loud what you noticed. Okay, hopefully you noticed that I did all three of those things when I was teaching you about gorillas. Now it's your turn. I want you to go find a nonfiction book that you can read. It could be one that you've already read and you want to read again, or it could be a new one, and spend some time reading it. In my class, we read 25 minutes every day. After you're finished with your reading, I want you to come back onto Canvas and record yourself teaching me or your teacher about what you read. Remember that you won't be able to teach us very well until you've done the first step of knowing the main ideas. So you might need to spend some time thinking about the main ideas and details before you start teaching. All right, I can't wait to hear what you're learning.